Basically, if I summarize, people are putting tough time as it is more appealing, and also uh, negative peer influence or people pleaser. So I think you can relate to those ones, sir. Thank you. Tough time.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Ayub. Thank you so much, Mr. Ayub, for that, for reading out those quotes. I hope I can be heard. Just that simple exercise. Do you all see how we all understand the same text differently? So we all understand the same thing differently. That's why it is very important to have different people code the same transcript. Because everyone has a different insight that can really actually help you generate something new from that data. So you have all these different statements that are actually communicating almost the same thing, or sometimes slightly different, maybe others seeing something different, which is a different lens. So it's always very good to have different people look at your data, code your data, most especially if you have like 2 or 3 supervisors, let them look through your data. You have peers, do the coding with them, something like that. But basically from what I've heard, actually people have the coding right. Many of you have really given very descriptive codes. They really communicate what is in the transcript. And maybe let's see how these people went about coding this same transcript. And we see how our opinions and views really inform how we transcribe and how we code the same piece of data. So let's see how this was done.
Parent discussing their son's experiences in middle school. For the first sentence, the researcher uses the code of middle school hell to describe or identify what the parent is talking about in that sentence. The sentence that follows, the researcher uses the code teacher's pet to describe the information. In other transcripts or elsewhere in this interview, anywhere the researcher sees evidence of relating to being a teacher's pet would be coded this way. The third sentence is coded by the researcher as bad influences. Again, anywhere else in this interview or other transcripts that relate to issues of being a bad influence would be coded this way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yu. So we all appreciate how diverse qualitative data analysis is. We have the same data, but we are all getting different insights from the same data. But if you look critically on this data, we are actually all communicating the same thing. So in the next step, we are going to see how we shall get all these different codes from maybe the different sections of the work or from different people, put all those that are similar together to come up with what we call a category. And then we shall also see how we can transform from a category to a theme. But basing on that, basically we can say that we can all get different insights from the same type of data. But usually with our research, they say this was a conversation between a parent and a teacher, right? So basically, you will not have a research question, but you can code anything. Coding is more of getting the big chunk of data and find a word or phrase that can actually describe it or interpret it. So you don't actually have to have a research question. But for our research, because we're looking at answering a specific research question, we need to look for data that can help us answer those research questions. Okay, let's go to the next step. I said after coding, you can always take a break and then come back to the next step with a fresh mind. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you so much. So now we are going to be bringing together these statements that we have coded into categories. So at this point, you need to ask yourself, all these different codes or statements that we have generated. For example, from that previous exercise, we all had different codes. Yeah? So ask yourselves, of those codes, which one can be put together? Yeah? Which one can be put together? For example, all those that we're talking about, bad influence, peer pressure, I saw some bad influence, bad groups, can they be put together because they're all communicating the same thing? So that is going to become our category. So different codes can be put together to form what we call a category. Is that okay? And this category should be able to stand on its own without it being between one category and the other. It has to be able to stand up on its own. It has to be mutually exclusive. So you find that, for example, if you look at the example given on your right, someone put different statements together and they categorized them. So for example, let's look at the one in I think that's brown. One was about administering vitamin K. This is in postnatal care. Administering vitamin K, applying tetracycline ointment, administering prescribed treatment, immunization. So they put all this together and they named the code administering treatment. So you see that it combines all these different things. And then they put, for example, there's the one in the one that has facilitating adaptation to extrauterine life. They put things that are being done to this baby to make sure that it survives. For example, breastfeeding within the first hour, helping the baby breathe, cord care, keeping the baby warm, feeding support. And they said this is actually all together, they form one category. And what's the name of that category? Facilitating adaptation to extrauterine life. So it's basically putting the codes that are similar together into a code that can be descriptive or interpretive, into a category that can be descriptive or interpretive. So I think we all appreciate how now we come up with categories. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So basically here, what we are doing, you're putting all similar highlighted segments that are talking about the same thing together. And then you can give that group or that cluster a name and it will become a category. So some people might choose to do this manually, like you see, they printed out their transcript, highlighted on the transcript those statements, and then they started putting those different highlights that they've cut out into different categories. So we have category 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see in those pictures. So they started classifying those different codes. Next slide, please. So from categories, now we go to another higher level kind of grouping or clustering. And this is when we are going to get it, that's why we're going to be getting now what we call themes. So with themes, we are going to start looking at what is the relationship between one category and the other. Is there a relationship? You know, is there a similarity between one category and the other? And what is that similarity? Is there a contradiction? You try to see that pattern or the relationship between those different categories. And after you identified specific patterns, then you can start grouping them together now into higher categories that we're going to be calling themes. So this is really a very analytical phase whereby you need to be very, very critical. Sometimes you might need to compare data from different methods of data collection, or you can need to compare data from different participants and see really if maybe in this category they're talking about not being motivated. Midwives are talking about not being motivated. Managers are talking about not being motivated. Maybe all those different groups that you interviewed are talking about something, and you've put this together. Can they form a theme? Maybe what we can call maybe a demotivating working environment, you know? Like, what is that relationship between different categories? And that's how we come up with themes. So I gave a few examples on the right, where this person classified different categories and they came up with themes. Maybe we are going to see this further when we get to the slide of how to present the findings. But I feel like, have we all appreciated how we come to the theme? So look at the pattern or the relationship between the different categories, and then you can come up to a theme. For example, if you look at the first theme in this table, the categories were 3. One was saying they are playful. And then the second one is saying solitary play dominates. So solitary, like alone. And then lastly, they're saying preference for specific play materials and play spaces. Maybe this person is studying about children. And this person combined all these 3 categories, and they said all these speak to playful, but on own terms. So they're showing that these kids are very playful, but they want to play alone. So the theme, the overall theme would be They are playful, but on own terms. So you can choose to name it in whichever way that you feel is more appropriate according to your data, and it is more descriptive to answer your research question. So we are basically bringing together different categories into a theme. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So there are different questions that you'll be asking yourself, but all of this is basically aiming at us making sure that we have the right category and we have the right theme. So we need to make sure that we get different quotes that can really support this theme and make sure that it is really well supported from the different participants that we have interviewed. Get different, you can get different quotes from different interviews or different transcripts or different data sets that can help you support that theme. And then usually one of the most important things, like I said, invite your peers to come and look at your themes. That way they can be able to tell you, or whether you might need to modify somewhere. They can give you new insights, and they can also help you maybe to agree or disagree with your theme. And that way you can be able to come up with really very interesting and trustworthy findings. And then lastly, you can find, we usually, like I said, like when we get the themes, we have to go back to the people who participated in the study, and then they can also confirm that these themes that you have generated really reflect what we told you. And that's the only way we can be, we can say that your data is credible and trustworthy. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I put some of the ways on how you can actually present your findings. So you have coded, you have identified the different segments of the data, you've classified them together according to the different patterns within them, maybe similarities and things like that, and came up with categories. Now from categories, maybe you have done more analysis into now classifying them into themes or higher level themes, or what we call the overarching theme. So I gave an example of how you can actually present those kind of things in your data. For example, here, this person had these different categories. They classified them into themes and then into sub-themes. So, but you see that color coding is really one of the best ways to present qualitative data, because it can bring out something very clearly, and someone doesn't have to move around the picture or the figure to try and make sense of it. For example, in this first figure, so we have the blue one. They have 3 categories: care within 24 hours, from birth to discharge, from birth to the end of the postpartum period. And all this is speaking to time. They called it timing. Yeah? And then from there, they went to the next categories. They also tried to bring different categories together according to maybe similarity or the pattern within them. One is talking about facilitating adaptation to extraterrestrial life and administering treatment. But all these are done for the baby or the newborn. And they're saying all these speak to enhancing newborn survival. So you look at the different categories and see, how are these interlinked? What is the relationship between them? And then you can give them a higher level kind of a category and then name it. So using that kind of pattern, you can classify different categories into subcategories or sub-themes and then into themes, like how you can see there. So you can also present your data in another different way. So on the right, we have someone who was doing about barriers and facilitators. So they use the arrows to show that now these are barriers and these are facilitators or enablers. And then they identified the different themes and the sub-themes. So there are different ways on how you can actually present your findings. And there's another way. We can go to the next slide. Next slide. So you see that we can really make use of these smart arts in Microsoft Word to present our data. For example, on your left, in the top right corner, they put the theme and then the different sub-theme that play to come up with this theme. So sub-theme 1, sub-theme 2, sub-theme 3, and all these lead to the overall theme, which is an unresponsive antenatal care policy to the women's specific needs. So you can really present this data. It's not text, so it is not numeric data, it is text data. But if you summarize it well into codes, make the codes, group them into categories, come from categories to themes, you can really present this data well, and someone can really read your findings chapter and they're really impressed. So there are different ways on how you can actually present the findings from qualitative data. You can go to the next slide. So this is also another way. We have still used arrows to identify. For example, this arrow that is on the left that is moving up, it speaks to enablers, they're improving. And then the arrow that is going down, it is speaking to maybe a barrier or something like that. You get? So you use different visual aids or visual representation of your text data to represent your themes and your sub-themes really very nice and in a more interpretive and more pleasing way. So this is also another way on how you can actually present your data. So basically you need to find the presentation that best, that you need to look for a way. It can be visual, it can be text, but you need to look for the best way to present your findings. But I personally believe that the visual aspect of presenting these findings is sometimes a very interesting one and a very catchy kind of presentation. You can go to the next slide. So after you have come up with your themes, so then you can come up with a description of those themes. So this has to be a really comprehensive description. Talk about what that theme really speaks about. For example, you're talking about supporting the mother, but what is supporting the mother? What did midwives say regarding supporting the mother? So talk about what that theme or what sub-theme or that category says and support that argument with extracts or quotes from the participants' transcripts. And with qualitative data, it's not about how many quotes that you put there, but rather the analytical bit. What is the message you're putting forward? What are those new insights you're really bringing? 1 or 2 quotes are enough, as long as they're really bringing out what you're trying to communicate. So we can use different colors for different quotes from different participants. Maybe one are key informant interviews, others are maybe focus group discussions. So to distinguish those two, you can use colors for the different quotes. So that's one way of also representing your data. So you need to find a very good description of your findings and support it with quotes from the data. So when you say that these are barriers, maybe for example, demotivating working conditions, what are those quotes from the transcripts that really support this demotivating working conditions? So you can present that in form of text. So we can go to the next. Next slide. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So, well, in conclusion, as we come to the end of the presentation, because we have, I think, like 2 or 3 slides left. So I give you some guidelines that can really help you when you're doing thematic or qualitative data analysis. And one, you always need to keep your research question at the back of your mind. So each text that you highlight, make sure it is going to do something regarding your research question objective. So always make sure as you're coding, you have your research questions and objectives at the back of your mind or written somewhere. And secondly, bracketing. Sometimes, you know, with qualitative research, you can sometimes get so absorbed in the data and you actually influence it unknowingly. So it is usually very good to do some bit of keeping a reflective journals and things like that to try and document your biases. And we call this bracketing. Try and document your biases so that when someone is actually analyzing your data or looking at your data, they have this at the back of their mind that, you know what, I'm looking at this data, but it was analyzed by a nurse who studied from Uganda. He studied at a government scholarship. He's married. He's doing this and this. So that they know that the person who really analyzed this data is this kind of a person. So you need to have that bit of positionality statement or reflexive statement that really speaks to your biases, so that someone can put those into consideration when they're really analyzing your data. Because you know that this can sometimes influence the data, and that's not what we want. Okay, and then thirdly, peer debriefing. Always involve your peers when you're doing qualitative research, because we all understand the same text differently. We all have different insights about the same thing. So that can enhance the richness of your analysis. And then the fourth thing, you need to be very transparent when you're really reporting your findings. Report what you got from the data. Report what the data is telling. You don't squeeze in your things because you want to come up with really impressive findings. Report what the data is telling you. Sometimes actually the things that we underlook are the key things or are the new things that are within our data. Those are the things that are really, that's the new insight that has not really been identified. And sometimes people tend to ignore them because they're not transparent. So we need to always make sure that we are transparent, report what the data is telling you, and also appreciate anomalies. Sometimes you might find contradictions within your data, but actually that might be the new insight that really needs to be put out there that is going to make your work outstanding. So you need to really make sure that those outliers are also accommodated in your data. For example, you have contradiction between one participant and the other. Talk about it, discuss it, find the literature to explain it, but don't ignore it. So those are some of the guidelines that I gave you. Can you go to the next slide? Next slide, please. So in conclusion, what I can say is that qualitative research is really one of the most interesting research. I personally I like it because it's interesting how much data you can really get from a very short period of time, and also how much insights that come with really a very small piece of data. And these are things that really you can never understand using any other approach. So qualitative research is really one of the most interesting things. And one thing I can say is that always make sure that you give it the time that it deserves. So analysis is really a very lengthy process, and always make sure that you budget well your time on how to do the analysis. So how long the transcription can take, the coding, the developing of the categories and the themes. So really make sure that you give it enough time. And then secondly, always involve or invite your colleagues in the analysis process. Engage them. Something good can come out of that because everyone has different insights about certain pieces of data. And then lastly, there is no one way of doing a thematic analysis. People use different approaches and always arrive at the same output. So always appreciate the diversity in the different approaches. Thank you. That was my presentation. Next is the references. So at this point, I invite any questions, if any, and then we can respond to them.
Yeah, before any response to the questions, I would like to supplement. Thank you so much. We shall thank you more and more along the course. So my supplementation goes to, after you've created the themes, take back the themes to the participants, and that is called member checking. Mr. Nassif, I'm only giving you 1 minute to talk about member checking after formulating the themes, taking the work and the themes back to the participant, and they actually check for the accuracy and to check whether the themes are a true picture of the experiences they went through or they explained to you. I hope I've explained it better.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
okay, thank you so much. So basically, member checking, it's one of the quality measures in qualitative research. With qualitative research, we don't speak in the aspect of validity and reliability, but with qualitative researchers, we speak in the aspect of trustworthiness or believability of the findings. So here, basically, we want to look at, there are about 4 components. We look at credibility, transferability, those kind of things. So one of the things is credibility, and credibility is more of how the trustworthiness of your findings, the believability, like people having trust in what you put out from your study. So one of the things that can really enhance that is doing what we call a member checking. So member checking is basically getting your findings that you have generated from that qualitative data analysis and taking them back to the people who participated in your experience as the people who participated in that study. So you can say that maybe in your study you found out that these people are getting less pay. You get, they are not compensated fairly. So take that back to the participant, and then for them, they really validate, and they'll validate that and they say that, yeah, true, what you found out that it reflects our experience. We are not really being compensated fairly. So all the findings that you get, all the themes that you get, the last step of the qualitative analysis is taking them back to the participants, and then for them to validate those findings, and then you can present them. However, if they do not validate them, then you have to go back to step one, read the transcript and go back through the entire process, coding until you come to the right findings. So that's the small thing I can say about the member checking.
Thank you so much. Then the other thing I would like also to supplement is we have some frameworks that can actually generate for you the themes, okay? We have a framework called the Consolidated Framework of Implementation Science, whereby it can guide you on what themes you will develop from your work. So you follow it. It has around like 3 themes: individual characteristics, in and out, setting, implementation process, and innovation itself. So some frameworks, you know, the theoretical frameworks and the conceptual frameworks. So these theoretical frameworks can also guide you on the themes that you'll have at the end of your data analysis. So right about now,